Welcome to Short and to the Point again, live on Awful Announcing here on YouTube. Thank you everybody for joining me. Ben Axelrod is here. We're going to talk a little bit more about what's going on in the ESPN, I guess, landscape with the betting. So tell me about this, Ben. You wrote it over on Awful Announcing, and there's a rebranding, which sounds so weird when we say rebranding here in 2023, but is it actually weird? So tell me about the story from going Sports Nation to ESPN on the social media platform.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. So last week, ESPN launched ESPN Bet, which is its betting app, which it took over from Barstool, which it's all operated by Penn Gaming. But the interesting part about this, or at least what I wrote about, was ESPN had these social media accounts that it used to use for Sports Nation, dating back to when Michelle Beadle and Colin Cowherd hosted the show. So, this is social media accounts that have been around for 10 years, and they had, I think combined between Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, they had over 10 million followers. And so rather than let those followings go to waste with Sports Nation being a thing of the past, they actually rebranded these accounts to be their ESPN Bet accounts. And they're pretty active on there, posting, betting lines and fun facts and bad beats and things of that nature, all the things you would anticipate seeing from a sports betting account's social media account. So it was really interesting for, I think, a company like ESPN that I can't remember a time where they've rebranded an account, for one purpose to another. But to see them do it, not only period, but to do it for such a high profile venture like ESPN Bet, I thought was really fascinating.
Well, not only that, but it's not just a high profile venture, but to do it, because they're kind of stark differences. And you think of what Sports Nation brought, and that could be a casual sports fan, to then the ESPN betting, which obviously we know betting's taking over. But talk to me a little bit about the transition, because I stupidly read the comments after they went from Sports Nation to ESPN Bet when ESPN did make that announcement. Don't do that, kids. It'll just put you in a bad mood. But I did it anyway. So how do you think people are going to react? Is it going to be a smooth transition? I feel like at the beginning, it might be a little awkward to see these bet things, but what are your thoughts on the transition?
Yeah, it's definitely awkward in the sense that all of a sudden this sports betting content was showing up in people's social media feeds who didn't necessarily sign up for it. Like you said, Sports Nation was a very user-centric show. They posted a lot of viral videos and voter polls and things of that nature. And so now you're getting kind of inundated with all this sports betting content from an account you didn't sign up to follow in the first place. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost a handful of followers from that. But at the same time, I think the casual sports fan has become accustomed to being inundated with sports betting content. So for a lot of people who followed the account, they probably just stuck with it. And as far as I've seen, the numbers, if anything, have gone up. So I think it's been a relatively smooth transition. Obviously, they have the ESPN machine behind it, but yeah, definitely kind of a bumpy road just in terms of, all of a sudden throwing all this sports betting content into people's feeds who didn't sign up for it.
On that same note, though, I feel like betting is very much taking over the sports media world, and there's so many different platforms for it. Are you surprised? I know you've talked about betting in the past, but from the infancy of just seeing a FanDuel and a DraftKings advertisement on social media, or I guess a lot of advertisements on TV, to now digital, what are your thoughts on the trajectory of that? I feel like it's not only grown, but really taken over the media space.
Yeah, so I live in Ohio, which sports betting was legalized here on January 1st. And in the lead up to that, everybody I know who lives in Ohio, their social media feeds were flooded with paid ads. And from various sports books, from high profile sports books to the most minuscule sports book you could think of. So I know a lot of friends of mine and colleagues of mine who got really frustrated with the overload of that early on. But to your point, it's just kind of inescapable now. I mean, it's the way we talk about sports and the way we follow this. And whether you're in the industry or just a casual observer, I mean, sports betting is essentially inseparable from just following sports in general. So yeah, I mean, I think that this just adds to it. I think it's really kind of interesting you look at places like FanDuel and DraftKings that are building their own media networks. Now you have ESPN kind of doing this in reverse, where you have ESPN, which is obviously a well-established media network. Now they're getting into the sports betting game and trying to drive their customers to their own app. It's just really interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think following sports and following sports betting in 2023 are kind of one and the same here.
As far as like getting the casual fan into betting, you could compare it to fantasy sports. It doesn't matter if they love football, what have you, but you get involved, you do the draft, you talk your shit, whatever you got to do. Is that the same scenario when it comes to betting? Because somebody may not have a favorite team. They couldn't care less about going to a bar and watching a team on a Sunday. But have you noticed that's actually picking up some steam, a casual fan truly getting into sports because of the betting aspect?
I think so. And I think, the reason why DraftKings and FanDuel, I think why they've kind of separated themselves as the leaders in the industry is because they had that fan base already built in with their daily fantasy sports. And so they were able to convert that customer base over into sports betting customers for them. And I think they also do the best jobs with the parlays, with the boosts, with the celebrity endorsements. And that's kind of a model we're seeing ESPN follow here. Is there's a boost for Scott Van Pelt. There's a boost for various for El Duncan. I know there was a boost for Georgia to win the national championship. They boosted it and put it as the El Duncan boost. I think that's kind of the model that ESPN's trying to follow, but it's just such a crowded landscape that's going to be interesting to see how much they can make a dent. Obviously, the numbers early on have been very impressive in terms of downloads, but now it's about how do you continue to grow that base now that the free bets are gone, now that you're not new and fresh. I think that's going to be really interesting to see here in the coming weeks and months.
We know the motherships are FanDuel and DraftKings. With that means all these smaller betting platforms are growing up or really just becoming, born in this industry. How intimidating is it to go up against those two as far as FD and DK goes? And what are they going up against if they want to launch their own smaller betting venture?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be really tough. I think just seeing here the way the sports betting landscape has kind of shaken out so far, you definitely have FanDuel and DraftKings at the top, and then you have a handful of other books all kind of fighting for third place. And I think you have, Fanatics, I think, has really differentiated itself as far as the rewards that it gives out to its customers. And it obviously has a built-in customer base with its online retail. But I think the thing that ESPN has that separates it from everyone else is just that ESPN brand. I mean, it really is a brand unlike any other in the sports marketplace. Obviously, it has the promotional power of its daily shows and online network and things of that nature. I think that ESPN has a lot going for it, but it's also playing catch up in a lot of ways. And DraftKings and FanDuel have just separated themselves so much from the pack that it's going to be really interesting to see how they can try to continue to make a dent here.
I feel like everybody wants to dub themselves a fantasy football expert because we beat like our dad once in like an auto draft league. How do you become a betting analyst? I feel like you have to have a crystal ball and just be excited that your mentions are going to fill up with threats. So I feel like it's such a unique portion. How would you approach to even becoming a betting analyst?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's such a unique field because like even the best sports bettors are only hitting like 54%, 55% of their bets. It's like, I mean, the cliche is the house always wins, right? And that's a cliche for a reason. Like you're not, one thing I've noticed, I follow a lot of sports betting analysts. I pay for subscriptions to try to tell me, what I don't know. And there's no easy way. There's no get rich quick scheme here. Like you're signing up for these apps and you're going to lose money. You just are, it's so hard to make a living in this industry and to do it professionally. And even the ones who are doing it are winning at such a small clip that, I think if you get into this and your whole idea is I'm going to give you winners, I'm going to give you picks, that's probably going to fail. Like you're probably going to wind up with egg on your face. But I think the websites and the services that do the best job are the ones that just give you a lot of information, the ones that can tell you good theories and tell you good stories about why this might be a good bet, or like almost give you the tools to then let you make your own decisions. I think that's kind of the way to go, because I think the days of, calling a 1-800 number and getting the 5 locks of the week, I think those days are long gone. I think the customer base is so much smarter than they were even just 5 years ago.
And that's interesting because you mentioned the customer base is so much smaller, and you're invested too. You said so yourself, you pay for subscriptions because you want to learn what you don't know. So what are those aspects that you don't know if you yourself are complimenting and saying, we're very smart, but we need to know this extra stuff? So what are those things that you're paying for that you want to know more about?
Yeah, I mean, I pay for a fantasy football website that gives you information like player usage, that does a good job of, they project their own fantasy football and daily fantasy stats for each week. They look at stuff, beyond the typical box score, like player usage, like snaps, like where the players are getting those snaps, which quarterbacks are throwing downfield as opposed to which ones are, just checking down. Just information that goes kind of beyond the box score. But even then, having all that information, it's only predictive, and it doesn't necessarily guarantee you anything. It doesn't guarantee you anything. So I think it's good to just have a lot of information to work with. But at the end of the day, sports are pretty unpredictable, and that's, why we love them too.
When you're being introduced into sports betting and you get all these ads, all this overwhelming, push this for $5 token, what have you, how do you kind of approach that? Or how would you want to talk to somebody about saying like, hey, I know you're being introduced to betting. There's a lot. It could be overwhelming. Somebody wants to get into betting. How would you approach that and let them know these are the baby steps you take so you're not overwhelmed if you want to bet small?
Yeah, and that's, I think, knowing what kind of bettor you want to be. Like, I think that's the key to it. Are you somebody who just wants to, make a crazy parlay and enjoy a weekend, watching college football on what's probably going to be a long shot bet? That's totally fine. But you also have to know more times than not, you're going to lose that bet. And I think that's the biggest thing is just knowing you're not going to be a sharp. You're not going to be a guy who's, picking winners and doing all this. You might have a good weekend, you might have a good season, but at the end of the day, like when you get that tax return, you're probably going to be writing off a loss, not a profit. So I think that's the biggest thing. Knowing, what's out there, knowing what sports you like to follow, and just kind of knowing like, I think it's good to just have an idea of who you want to be as a sports bettor and what you want to be. And, once you figure that out, you can kind of go from there. But I think that's the biggest thing. And obviously knowing the pitfalls as well.
Live betting was introduced to the landscape recently. What are your thoughts on that? Because we went from let's get these in lock before the game starts, what have you, but you can actually do stuff in game now. Does that change anything for you, or were you more excited? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think live betting it can definitely be a dangerous tool as far as falling into those pitfalls, because you can see a game going one way and think, shoot, I'm just going to, overload on this one side and hope that it stays this way. And obviously that doesn't always work out. Obviously games change and outcomes change and odds change. So I think that live betting can be a pretty dangerous tool. I do think it can be valuable if you're watching a game and you had a hunch that things might go one way and they start out another way, and you feel so strong in your conviction that you get better odds, then that's great. But I think when you introduce live betting, that's really an area where you need to be disciplined as a bettor and to know, you don't want to be out there just chasing bets, because that's how you lose your money. I think you want to be disciplined and have an approach when it comes to live betting, but it's definitely not something you want to be doing on a whim on a consistent basis.
Did you learn the discipline early on in your betting ventures, or was it too late and you're like, this sucks?
I mean, I've been at this now in various forms for like 8 years. And so,
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody takes their lumps early and you think like, oh man, this is so easy. Like all I need is the Titans to win by 7 points. Like, of course they're going to win by 7 points. And you don't realize like 7 points is massive in an NFL game. So, but I enjoy it. Like to me, I like to bet on sports because I feel more engaged with the product. It's a fun lens to view sports on a week-to-week basis. But I definitely have no illusions like about getting rich from this anymore, like I did when I first got in.
Fair, fair. That's why I don't participate, because I just get such a big head. I'm like, I'm going to win all the money, and then I don't. Before I let you go, this part really intrigues me. I cover a baseball team for a living, and I know things and I see things that others may not. And so you can call that insider. I'm not going to say insider trade, but insider info. So when it comes to this, and you have ESPN Bet or any sort of analysts on some of these platforms, obviously if they're surrounded by former players, current players, people inside and around the game, how do you find the balance of making sure you're not in any legal trouble, you're not getting any trouble and anybody else in trouble, but still offering up advice?
Yeah, I think that the part for ESPN that's really dangerous is the insider aspect of this, and this is something we saw with FanDuel and Shams Charania back during the NBA draft, when his reporting was shifting the betting odds, and it wound up being favorable for FanDuel. I think stuff like Adam Schefter, Woj. I think that stuff can be really dangerous because what they tweet out does affect the lines. And so I know that ESPN put a policy in place regarding reporters who cover teams and reporters who cover leagues not being able to bet, which I was frankly surprised that policy wasn't already in place. But then you also have your more forward-facing talents, your Mike Greenbergs, your L. Duncans, your Scott Van Pelts, and it seems like those are the talents ESPN's really relying on when it comes to promoting this. And, I think for all intents and purposes, like those are not insiders. Those are people who are their hosts, their personalities. And so I think having them associated with the betting app, I think that's fine. I think that's fair game. I think for ESPN, it's probably smart, but I do think we're probably going to see, something where Woj reports something and it shifts a line and then something else happens. And people are going to have questions about ESPN being in bed with its own sports betting app because, there's lots of money at stake here.
It's crazy. You just want to tweet the news. The next thing you know, you're in charge of people's livelihoods and rent and mortgages. It's insane to think about. Ben,
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.